Well, we're sitting here today with Dr. Mercola, who is a true pioneer in health, and actually he was also part of my own health journeys back 15, 16 years ago when I was bedridden with chronic fatigue. One of the places that I got a lot of the information that helped me with my own health was your site. So yeah, it's truly a great honour to be here. And I was just wondering, I mean, what was the initial reason that you sort of started Dr. Mercola?
I was challenged because I was passionate about health and science and was frustrated that patients would come into my office when I was seeing patients and they would tell me about some new breakthrough, scientific breakthrough, and they said, and I didn't know about it because I was in the office treating patients and they were watching the news and I wasn't. So I've always been passionate about technology. I mean, I took my first computer programming class in 1968 and I was just starting to get into the internet. This is the mid-90s and maybe 96 or 97. And I realized that I could really get this information from the internet, just like the broadcasters were. So I did that and circumvented the loop, and I would actually know about it before the patient. So I wouldn't be surprised when they came in with these findings. And then I realized that if I was finding it interesting, that others would like it too. So I wrote up a little newsletter and started distributing it. But at that time when I wrote it, hardly anyone had email. It was like maybe 5% of my patients had email, so I couldn't give it away because they had no way to get it unless I printed it and gave it to them, which I think it did for a while. But eventually it just became a more broadly distributed.
So I was curious where the philosophy for Mercola.com came from, because it's sort of a little bit unusual for doctors to really put the power of control of people's health in their own hands. So was there any particular switch that happened for you?
Health has been one of my passions also, since even before computers. And that's why I went to medical school, to learn how to stay healthy, which was quite different than most of my classmates who were there to treat disease. I was there to try to figure out how to get people healthy. And still, I think to that day, it's pretty much the same paradigm. So I was taking and I kind of fell into that trap. I came out a drug prescribing doctor and put many thousands of patients on antidepressants and a whole variety of other drugs. It wasn't until the early 90s that I realized that there was a whole network of physicians who understood the most fundamentals of healing strategies, and I networked with them and started learning from their networks and going to what I guess to this day continues to persist, because most of this information is not taught in school. You have to learn it after you graduate. So you go to these weekend seminars or courses and gradually acquire that, and it was seeing incredible results with the patients I was treating, and the thought that I could extend the reach of the information to other people that I couldn't, because as a clinician, you're really limited to maybe treating tens of thousands of patients in your lifetime. And I probably treated 25,000 patients. Maybe could have gotten up to 50 or even 100 if I had continued in that path. But I thought I could leverage that experience with a wider audience through the internet.
Well, in everything that you've looked at, I mean, ultimately there's a few fundamentals of health, or if you like, there's like the fundamentals of where energy come from, and most of us have sort of really recognized the biochemistry route and where energy comes from food, but obviously we breathe in oxygen, and sunlight hits us, like you do grounding, and there's all these other sort of fundamental sources of energy. But I was curious how you see that, and what you see as the fundamentals of the source of energy.
Well, an interesting observation is, and I think this is true for most people who are serious health learners and in their journey, that the more they learn, the simpler it really becomes. It's really pretty simple strategies. So obviously there's complexities to that need to be unraveled by some skilled health clinicians, but for the vast majority of people, just applying simple strategies can reverse like 80% of the illness. I mean, if they just understood that at the basic level, and one of them is to just simply eat real food. I mean, how much simpler does it get than that? But yet, the vast majority, maybe up to 90% or more of the food that people eat is processed food. And not only is it devalued in its nutrient density, but they also add a whole variety of other ingredients that are usually pernicious to health. So when you circumvent that whole process and either grow the food yourself, which is ideal, or get it from someone you know is growing it correctly, then you can avoid most of these problems. So that's one of them. But with respect to energy, I think it's surprising that many people, including healthcare clinicians, don't realize that the majority, at least as I understand it, that the energy that we are utilizing is not actually from the fuel that we're eating, the food that we're eating as fuel, but really from the energy exposures that we're given, primarily from the sun or indirectly from the sun. And that powers up our mitochondria, which are these organelles within most every one of our cells. Our red blood cells and skin cells don't have them. But pretty much that's how our body runs, on these mitochondria generating ATPs. But the fuel as a substrate is not the only way that you power up and generate them. You can actually do it through a variety of electromagnetic frequencies like ultraviolet, red, and near infrared frequencies.
So would you say that you see food as perhaps a way to replace the broken proteins, and obviously you need to eat food to get minerals and proteins.
Well, yes,
but it's
as
actually
building blocks of life. You absolutely need them for that. But more importantly, I think what's a pernicious contributor to most health is something called redox dysregulation, where this oxidation reduction cycles are mismatched. And as a result of that, you create excessive reactive oxygen species, sometimes reactive on nitrogen species. And ultimately, these then cause the production of free radicals. So it's not that we don't need any of them, and that's another mistake that's been made for decades, and some people are still making, thinking that, take antioxidants are good because free radicals are bad, and the more we limit them, the worse. But that's actually a highly counterproductive strategy. So if we can regulate and optimize our oxidation reduction strategies, then we can improve our health, because the free radicals, when you have them in excess, will decimate cell membranes, proteins, and DNA. And that contributes to most of all the disease they have. So the key is to radically optimize the production of free radicals. And one of the ways that we do this is by choosing the right foods. And most people are choosing too many carbohydrates. And then, of course, the quality of the food is another issue, but it really not directly related to the oxidation reduction balancing. So if you can teach your body how to burn fat as its primary fuel, then you'll be burning a lot of ketones, which are one of the cleanest fuels that you can burn, and generate far less reactive oxygen species. So it's this excess that really contributes to the damage, certainly the aging, and not just the disease, but the aging process. And one of the most effective strategies that we can have, at least from a physical perspective, to slow down that break is to really optimize that redox dysregulation.
And what would you advise people who are trying to have a sort of an antioxidant diet or an anti-inflammatory diet? I mean, do you advise they reduce lectins or that type of thing?
Yeah, I'm a big believer. Stephen Gundry is a real novel, innovative thinker. He wrote the book Plant Paradox, and really does a spectacular job of explaining the whole issue with lectins, which are essentially plant proteins produced by plants to defend themselves and can kill predators in the amounts that they're exposed to. But obviously we're much bigger, so they tend not to kill us. I mean, they can if there's an allergic reaction, but that would be unusual. But they can cause many problems, especially autoimmune problems. So I think it's wise to follow that strategy, and it's not like you have to be obsessive compulsive about it, but if you're struggling with a health issue, I think it's certainly worthwhile to consider a lectin exclusion diet. And interestingly, I wasn't aware of his work before I published my book, but our books are almost identical, except I didn't integrate the lectins into it. And it's relatively small, because most of the foods I was recommending were lectin-free anyway, just by the nature of the beast, because most of the time we don't recommend legumes where most of the more pernicious lectins reside.
And so, yeah, I mean, when you're looking at diet, obviously there's many different diets, from paleo to Mediterranean to to ketosis to vegans, and obviously that can be quite confusing for people. But what would you say is the sort of the fundamental truths that are common to all diets, where people can't really go wrong if they follow those guidelines?
I'm biased. I wrote the book Fat for Fuel, which is really focused on cyclical ketosis, and that's a big difference than paleo or ketosis, because many people, including many of the experts in the field in the previous books that were written, didn't make that differentiation distinction. But it's been my personal observation, and that of many others people that I know, that once they do continuous ketosis, that actually is highly counterproductive. The body's like in continuous starvation mode, and that's not what we were designed to do. So I think from my perspective, there's a number of different ways, because you can certainly, many plant-based diets can achieve very similar benefits, largely because they're having relatively small amounts of protein. And most people eat just too much protein. That's been my experience. And when you do that, you activate this really ancient pathway called mTOR, which is short for mechanistic target of rapamycin, which can have really serious consequences. Because if it's chronically activated, you'll radically increase your risk of cancer, because it suppresses a really important biological process called autophagy, which is a repair and regeneration cycle that our body has to remove these damaged cells. And then mitophagy, which is the same for mitochondria. So we want to make sure that we're optimizing the pathways. One of the best ways to have low protein, in most plant-based diets and vegetarians and vegans, they're having low protein, because guess what? Protein is not, or plants are not very protein dense. They really aren't. So that's a good reason. Plus they have many other phytonutrients and energetic components and biophotons. So it's good from that perspective. So I think the key, to answer broadly, would be any type of diet that resonates with you, produces health. And if you want to get more specific, to actually produce ketones periodically, which is the cleanest burning fuel, because ultimately you want to teach your body to burn ketones. And when you have a largely plant-based diet, many of those carbohydrates in plants are indigestible carbohydrates, otherwise known as fibers, that we can't break down, but the bacteria in our gut does, and they use them, and they actually break them down to short-chain fats, which are burned into ketones. So it doesn't really matter which way you get there, and if you're healthy, then I would never encourage or recommend or advise someone to switch unless they're having problems. But if they are, then a cyclical ketogenic diet integrated with this plant lectin-based approach, I think, would be the wisest strategy I know of. And I've been studying nutrition for over 3 decades, and it's been my passion, and it's a useful tool. But I'm so excited because that's just one way. Ultimately, the way that picking the right diet works is to optimize your mitochondria to produce energy. But there's so many other ways to optimize mitochondrial function aside from the food that you're eating. And I talk a lot about them in my book, but some of the more important ones is avoiding toxins and detoxifying properly. And one of the most important pernicious toxins is this pervasive exposure that we have to EMFs, which is the artificial radiation that we should not be exposed to. Not all artificial radiation is bad, but most of it is. And I really think it's one of the greatest threats that we have as a species, because this exposure is almost exponentially increasing. And we were never designed to be exposed to it. And it clearly causes mitochondrial damage through a mechanism I can discuss if you want to go into it. But we know the mechanism now. At least we believe we do. I didn't figure it out, but there's a Dr. Martin Paul who did PALL. And it's really clear, and if you understand the mechanism, benefit of doing that is that you can mitigate against the pathology or the consequences.
Well, maybe we should talk a bit more about how cellular metabolism works and the mitochondria works. And there's the couple of food pathways from glucose and from ketosis. But then we've also got the pathways from light and also from electrons from the ground. But do you have a sort of a model or explanation?
Well, the food that we eat, you just don't magically eat it and somehow goes into your mitochondria and converts to energy. It kind of does that, but there's a lot of steps in between. It has to be broken down. It has to be absorbed into the bloodstream and then broken down with enzymes. Then ultimately, whether it's sugar or fat, which is the primary fuel that powers our mitochondria, it goes to the substrates that it uses. And then they run through the electron transport chain in the mitochondria and produce ATP ultimately. But that electron transport chain consists of 5 different proteins, one of them being cytochrome C oxidase, and that resonates really well with sunlight, certain frequencies of sunlight, specifically ultraviolet and red and near infrared. And that's what provides a lot of the power to produce these additional ATPs along with the food that you're eating. And essentially, as I understand it, the details are somewhat fuzzy. I'm not sure that anyone, at least I've never encountered anyone that's explained it clearly, but the suggestions and implications are really clear that this extra energy is generated, and I believe it's generated without any reactive oxygen species. It's just sort of oils the wheels, so it greases them so that you're more efficient at producing it. And as a result, you don't have any of the subsequent damage that you get when you generate energy. Because these reactive oxygen species, essentially, if you're eating the wrong fuel, they're like the pollution when burning fuel that we get. Like when we're burning a fire, we have heat, but we also have smoke and pollution that impairs the environment. So you ideally want to burn the cleanest fuel, like hydrogen, which is a really clean fuel. You burn that. It's actually interesting, like 3 times more energy dense than gasoline, hydrogen. I just learned that recently. And but virtually, and when you burn hydrogen as fuel, what's the byproduct? Water. So you can't have much of a cleaner fuel than water. So the key is to really, when you're generating energy, is to have the cleanest fuels you can, so that you don't have these excessive reactive oxygen species.
I mean, what do you think of like Gerald Pollack's work of how light or photons is basically?
Yeah, Pollack is brilliant. Of course, he's one of the experts in structured water, or what he calls EZ. And there are a variety of ways to create structured water, as I understand it. Certainly one could do it through ultraviolet radiation, but also infrared radiation will do it. And you can vortex the water, and Victor Schauber was really big on that. But from my perspective and my impression or digestion of his material and others, is that I'm not certain and not convinced, put it that way, not convinced that it's incredibly valuable to drink structured water, although I drink structured water, and I structure it by just simply putting it
in a way, I'm not sure, I mean, it necessarily exists in water. Well, it doesn't hold very long, because you only get structure next to a hydrophilic
It's my understanding, certainly the exposure to those electromagnetic frequencies will do it, and vortexing will, but also the temperature. So you can get it to 39 degrees, which is the temperature Fahrenheit, which is the temperature should be in your refrigerator. That will structure it too. So most of the water I drink is about 39 degrees. So it's structured, and I do it just because I like doing it, and it's fine, and I like the taste of cold water. But the most important structured water is the water in your body, and the way you structure that is when you go outside in sunlight with very little clothes, which is one of the reasons why I moved to Florida. And what happens when you're exposed to the ultraviolet, it stimulates the nitric oxide, and it dilates the superficial blood vessels in the surface of your skin. So as a result, I believe it's more than half the blood flow in your body is shunted to the surface of your skin. And literally a few millimeters away from the tip of the surface of your skin, so that the light can penetrate and go into your bloodstream and go into your body. So not only the ultraviolet, but and this is the red and the near infrared are frequencies that very few clinicians appreciate as being vital for health, and those are really important frequencies, and that's what powers, in large part, the mitochondria.
Would you say it's pretty similar to how photosynthesis is working in plants?
Yes, there's a lot of analogies that I think hold up pretty well. In many ways, we're very similar to plants. That if you put a tarp over this, I mean, this is a real live plant. This is not a fake. I mean, there's no way that you can tell on this, but this is a live plant. So if we put a tarp over it, it'd be dead in a week or two. It needs sunlight. Well, we're not going to be dead if you put a tarp over us in a week or two. In other words, don't expose us to any natural sunlight. But our health will diminish and deteriorate. We need these frequencies. We need them for health. And I think as science learns more, that we'll see many more of the similarities between us as a biological entity in extracting energy from the sun.
Yeah, I mean, sunlight is basically when it hits structured water or H3O2, and it ends up creating electrons, and electrons ends up as that source of energy in your cells.
Yeah, it's actually the energy that the red blood cells need to squeeze through the capillaries, because the red blood cells are actually bigger than many of the capillaries. And how do they power? It's certainly not from the heart pumping. It is mechanically impossible to generate that much pressure if you do the physics of it. It's just impossible. So they actually use the energy from structured water, the H3O2 that you referenced, and take that energy and squeeze through.
Yeah, I mean, the heart's pretty fascinating. There's also, well, I mean, it's out of heart mass that it isn't just a pump, that it acts as it basically acts as this sort of coordination for information across the body as well.
A lot of fascinating information there.
How do you sort of go about your own daily life? Like, how do you incorporate getting access to sunlight, grounding, healthy things?
I think I seek to optimize as many important biological strategies to optimize my own health personally. And one of the important ones is gratitude, just to be very grateful on a regular basis. And I seek to do that daily. And I'm very grateful that I've been able to work hard and diligently and have a position in life where I'm able to move my personal residence to a place where it is easier to be healthy. Because I was born and raised in Chicago and lived there the first 55 years of my life, and maybe longer. And I always was confused, like most people living in similar environments, that was okay. That's what you're used to. But it was, I think anyone realizes as you're exposed to continuous cloudy weather that there could be better strategies to stay healthy. And there's just a lot of clouds in Chicago, and many other places in the country too, certainly. So I live in Florida now and moved, so I'm really grateful for that. And that's one of my main strategies. I like to walk on the beach every day for about an hour to 2 hours, depending on my schedule, and which is a big time commitment. Because, I've got a busy schedule, as most people watching this probably do. So I justify that by reading when I'm walking. And some people are confused that I can do that. Regularly, some people I walk by reading, and some people are saying, "How could you do that?" It's simple. You just read.
No, I started doing that since listening to you do that.
Yeah, and you're able to do it no problem.
Yeah.
So, I love the Kindle. Kindle weighs a few ounces, and actually, it's the healthiest screen that you could look at, because especially if it's in airplane mode and all the LEDs are turned off, essentially there's no LEDs, there's no magnetic radiation, and there's no blue light. It's just reflected light from the sun, because most of the screens can cause a problem too to our retina. They have too much blue light, isolated blue light frequencies that you have to compensate for with some blue light filters. So none of that on the Kindle, which is I love. I can hold like hundreds of books in like 2 ounces. Is great. So I'm able to read about 100 to 200 books a year, or in a large number of studies. So that, and then optimizing the diet and exercise are my other strategies, and a lot of other simple biohacks that I do, like interesting ones like cold thermogenesis, which I understand that you've been playing with too, but perhaps a little bit too obsessively. So
yeah, I almost died doing it. Perfect. So perhaps you could just talk a little bit about detoxification and the importance of it.
Well, detoxification is important. It's virtually impossible to be free of toxins living in the 21st century. We could have done that many years ago when we didn't have this pervasive exposure to toxins and chemicals. But now even if you're living in the remote areas, we live in a polluted world, and it's an artifact of advancement of industrialization and technology. And I'm very grateful for many of the benefits it's provided with. But the downsides is there's a lot of toxins. Just the introduction of lead into the gasoline supply. I think the half-life is hundreds of years, and it's in the environment. And for 80 years, we were putting lead in the gasoline all over the world, not just in the United States. So that's just one example. So I think it's really critical. It really is a vital component to address. Problem is, there's a lot of confusion and mystery around detoxification, and a lot of people look at it as a woo-woo, wacky-based approach, but nothing could be further from the truth. My current understanding and appreciation is that what even supersedes a formal detox program is to really get a good hold on limiting your exposure to these non-native or artificial EMFs. Because if you don't, and you have these exposures, it's going to make it very difficult, even with the best of detox programs, to release these poisons back out and to remove them from your body. So not only is there a primary benefit specifically to your mitochondria, from avoiding these EMFs, but secondarily, I think, from helping your body detoxify the poisons.
And what's some of the ways that you use to detoxify, like coffee enemas or ozone? Or
I've never used coffee enemas. I do use ozone. I've tried. I have a medical grade ozone machine, so that I use every day. I was initially, I think the ideal way to do it is indirectly, at least at home. That's probably the best. But you need a medical grade. You have to use oxygen cylinders. You just can't get something over the counter. But unfortunately, I just had this pretty violent reaction to it, so that I just have to have a bowel movement every time I have to do that. So I can't.
Yeah.
So I've integrated it into my sauna strategy, and I actually use it. I put it in my mouth. Don't breathe it in, because you don't want to breathe ozone, of course. And then you can put it in your ears. I put it in my ears too.
Have you ever tried one of those ozone steam tents or steam saunas?
I've essentially created one. I have a sauna, a tent sauna, that I put the ozone gas in, and I seal it up pretty well, and I seep in that for 30 minutes or so. But I've just recently had a deeper appreciation of molecular hydrogen as a therapeutic benefit, which can address some of the excessive free radicals in ozone. So you still get all the benefits of ozone. It's not like taking vitamin C or vitamin E, which I think would mitigate some of the benefits. But with hydrogen gas, you get all the benefits and none of the side effects. So I do both of those together, hydrogen gas.
You don't think it might work if you oscillated them on different days?
Oh, no. They work magically together. Yes, it works very powerful. The hydrogen gas itself is a really important signaling molecule, and it has some very profound hormetic upregulation benefits for internal antioxidants. Upregulates pathways like catalase and superoxide dismutase and glutathione. Just the hydrogen gas by itself. So it increases this pathway called NRF2 that improves those productions of those. So it's like the best antioxidants you can make is the ones your body makes, because there's a feedback loops involved, and it doesn't make too much. It makes the right amount, the Goldilocks amount, exactly what you need, but you have to have the stimulus to do it. Hormesis is pretty similar to probably the best example that anyone would be familiar. Most everyone would be familiar with is exercise. Exercise itself is a harmful practice. It damages your body, no question about it. But we know that if you don't exercise or move on a regular basis, you're not going to be healthy. So it does it. The magic of exercise occurs actually in the recovery. And many obsessive compulsive exercisers, like I was, and so I always seek to challenge not to be, because I thought it's so good. But you have to be careful. But you need appropriate recovery to get reap the benefits. So similarly, hormesis involves something that can cause harm to you and will cause harm in small amounts, but it's just a small amount so that your body has a response to it, and then you actually get a benefit from it. Like if you're doing bicep curls, you're going to damage your biceps muscle and create some rips and tears, but then it gets that signal and it actually gets bigger and stronger. So that's a hormetic benefit. And you could do the same thing with these biological signaling molecules like hydrogen. And there's other ones like nitric oxide and hydrogen sulfide and carbon monoxide that provide, in appropriate therapeutic quantities can really improve your health biologically.
And with exercise, I think you were just beginning to indicate that. I mean, there's this very common sort of misconception, if you're unhealthy, fat, overweight, tired, or whatever it is, that you just have to do lots of exercise. Whereas I think what you were beginning to indicate is that it's not necessarily that.
I've been passionate about exercise for literally 50 years. The key point to remember here, and it's a simple strategy, is that you cannot out-exercise your mouth. So exercise is only 20% of the equation. About any expert who really seriously studied this, 80% of it is the food that you eat. I mean, that's not even including all these other biological hacks like photobiomodulation and photobiology, which so probably even lessens it. But you do need some exercise, but you can do simple exercise. I don't know if we're going to have time to do it here, but there's a simple, high-intensity exercises are great, but there's a simple one that literally takes 3 minutes, and requires no equipment, no gym membership, and just 3 times a day. You probably don't need anything more, and a little walking. That's it. Because exercise ideally is movement. The only reason we have formal exercise programs now is because we live in industrialized 21st century, and most of us are disengaged from the practices that it requires to stay healthy, which is like farming, producing our own food and our shelters, and we delegate those responsibilities to other people. So we have a desk job and we just don't move like we're supposed to. So if you're doing regular movement, there really is no need for exercise unless you have some really targeted goal, like you're competing in some sport or you want to make your body look a certain way. But from a health perspective, it's not necessary.
And I guess just so people totally understand why movement is so beneficial.
Crucial.
I mean, it's obviously it circulates all the nutrients around and all the oxygen around. If you're just sitting here all day, you're not really able to heal or repair bodily tissue because the blood isn't circulating.
Yeah, and then now this is a mistake that I made, and I suspect many other people are or have made, but I just like to reinforce it. Because I said I've been exercising for 50 years, but that exercise almost always consisted of about an hour of exercise a day. Usually in a gym, sometimes outside on a track or training, but rarely more than that. So maybe sometimes more, maybe an hour, 2 hours. But that was it. And the rest of the day I'd be sitting. After I stopped seeing patients, I was mostly had a desk job. I would sit from 10 to 16 hours a day. 10 to 16 hours a day. And as a result of that practice, this lack of movement, but still exercising, I developed severe, intractable, debilitating back pain. I couldn't stand up for more than a half hour without severe back pain. And I tried many strategies to alleviate it, seen many chiropractors, exercises, stretching, massage therapists, physical therapy, slant boards, you name it. It's dozens of therapies. Nothing worked until I stopped sitting down. It disappeared because I was moving more, giving the body what it needs. It didn't need exercise. It needed to move. And that is really the goal. That's why I'm a big fan of fitness trackers that teach people so they can count it. You don't want to get crazy with that either. But, if you're only moving 2,000-3,000 steps a day, you're not moving enough. You got to, and you need other movements than just walking too. I mean, ideally you want to move throughout the entire range of movement possibilities so that you don't have these limitations and restrictions.
And how do you practically get that into your working life? Because, you're obviously like a really busy entrepreneur, but how do you handle that with computers and?
Well, it's easy. The 2 hour walk, 1 to 2 hour walk, and then I still have my exercise. I do this exercise this high intensity exercise that's called the nitric oxide dump, designed by Dr. Zach Bush, who's one of my favorite human beings. And 3 minutes of high intensity, do that 3 times a day, and then I do a wide variety of different calisthenics and just move. I do a lot of walking. I intentionally place, my water is not next to my desk. I have to physically walk to the fridge, or I go to the bathroom that's the furthest away so that I don't, so I intentionally make it less easy, put these obstacles that require me to do extra movement to achieve what the basics are.
Have you tried walking desks and that?
No, I'm not a big fan of that. But I do stand. I can even show you. I have a slant board. I have a wobble board and like a surfboard too that I stand on. So when I'm standing, I'm not standing on the floor. I'm standing on different movement devices.
Got you. And would you have any special advice for people who are suffering from exhaustion?
Well, chronic fatigue would be another term for it. So, I guess that's what you were struggling with. This is a real challenge for many people. And other similar conditions would be electromagnetic hypersensitivity or multiple chemical sensitivities. I think the foundational core of this in most diseases is dysfunction in the mitochondria. They aren't working properly. And I don't know what your road to recovery consisted of, but anything that improves the mitochondrial ability to produce energy is going to help. So those are the strategies that we were already discussing. Paying really careful attention to the food, light exposure, movement when you can. If there's enough energy, obviously over move, then that's going to be problematic. But a lot of people look at hormones too, and that could be an issue. I'm a little careful of that, even bioidentical hormones, because it's almost like playing God. You just don't know. I mean, how do you know what's the right dose? I mean, ideally, your body should figure that thing out. So if you give it everything it needs, then hopefully your hormones are regulated. Now, sometimes that's not the case. I know there's specific targeted cases where it's suspected, but I'd be really careful about using hormones to address chronic fatigue, other than basic things like thyroid, which is sort of a pervasive problem for many people in this country, especially women, largely because we're drinking fluoridated water and eating soy foods. Those are two big factors. But there are others, but those are two big ones, and iodine deficiency, of course.
And how much has purpose played a role in your life, and how much do you see it as I know for myself, like when I was really ill, one of the things that helped get me out of it is I sort of had this purpose to create a health system, and then end up meeting the people to help make it happen, and it both got my own health and ended up, with a business out of it. And obviously for you, you've had this extremely strong purpose throughout your life.
Yeah, purpose is one way of putting it, and I would totally resonate with that. Passion is another, and I think ideally, if you could, my two passions were health and technology, and I've integrated those, and as a result, and being careful to make it pure. That would be the other P, pure passion, purpose. Because if it's not impure, it is for many people, is that they get we all have to earn a living. There's just no way around it. And as a physician, I was sort of fortunate to have a occupation where I was paid well, so I didn't have to worry about things. I was able to pursue my passions without having to worry about an income, which I know isn't the case for many people. But if you can pursue your passions ideally without concern about financial reimbursement, which tarnishes it and makes it less authentic, then you're not going to get the benefits as well. But when you do that, I think it really is the key. It's the key to success in business too, is authentically follow your passion even if it doesn't work out, you're doing what you like, and that's a key element of life. And then it's so easy to be grateful when you're doing something you're passionate about. You don't have to struggle with it.
Yeah, well, I was just thinking. If people are ill and they really want their health back, if they're able to align their purpose or their passion with health and getting their health back, then that's far more likely to happen.
Yeah, it is. But sometimes their passion may be something completely unrelated to health, and not to diminish or disrespect that, because it is what it is. You can't pick your passion. It is what only you know your passion. So you have to figure it out for yourself, which is a challenge. Many people aren't able to do that. And there's thankfully, we live in the 21st century. There's a lot of good videos on YouTube that are free. There's books that you can get. So there are a lot of resources that people have access to now that this simply wasn't available. When I went to medical school, I took my whole last year of residency training. I took an additional year, and it was just research. And it's just, I think a lot of people, especially if you're younger, don't understand that, this was the 80s, okay? To do research, I had to physically go to the medical library, look up in a physical paper book, and if I wanted the most current, I'd have to do it every month because they only were published once a year. I have to look it up and then physically write it down. Then I have to walk over to the journal stacks to pick them up, then take that journal stack, go to the photocopier and copy the article, and go home and read it. Now you can do it all online. Literally in 99% less time. And people can have access to this. Well, it didn't exist. We have access to the greatest wealth of information that ever existed in the history of this planet. And a lot of people don't get that. That hasn't not been that way for that long. It's literally about a generation. So in almost anything you want to learn, you can figure out. That is the beautiful thing about it. That's why it's like, it's crazy. It's hard. It's hard not to satisfy your passion because there's so much information out there to feed it.
And when you're looking at the body's control system, I guess traditionally it's either been like genetics or a hormone control system or a chemical control system. Yet there's sort of these there's these problems with that in what on earth is actually controlling hormones and the chemicals. How do you see the body's control system?
Clearly it's you can't control it just from a simple chemical model. It's like impossible because physics don't work out. You can't transfer the information that quickly. It's just like impossible. So there has to be some superstructure that embeds the whole process and some type of information transfer. And then you get to biophysics. And I'm an area that I'm fascinated about, but don't really understand too well. I just get confused with physics, like many people. But I read it and I said, I have to read it again and again. I still don't get it. Because I'm not very smart, but I'm very disciplined. I work hard. But physics kind of evades my ability to, I can appreciate it, but to understand it, be able to explain it. I'm much better at chemistry and basic science on that.
I guess, one way of looking at how people are healthy is this sort of interaction between the environment of their whole lives, or their exposure to the environment in their whole lives, and their genetics. But it's just...
Well, it's definitely not genetics. I mean, that's a myth that has to be thrown out, because genetics are... I mean, when we did the Human Genome Project, we thought we had 100,000 genes, 200,000 genes. Turns out we had 23,000. And most of the rest of the DNA was junk DNA. Well, that junk DNA is actually what controls everything. It consists of microRNA, and long non-coding RNA, which is like 95% of the DNA. And these are the epigenetic controllers of the expression of the genetic code. So your genes mean diddly squat. They're just there. It's the regulation, the expression of the genes is the whole thing. And that's done through the micro and the long non-coding RNA. So, and that's what's the lifestyle. It's the food that you eat, the emotions, the relationships you have. It's all controlled by that, not your genes. So, I mean, it's
probably to do with how the energy environment is interacting.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's why, it's just, you see people like Angelina Jolie, who's, this actress who's just capitulated and surrendered her decision-making to the conventional medical model, has both of her breasts lopped off because she didn't even have breast cancer, but she had a genetic risk factor for it, which is just insane, but that is just where we're at now. And it's just sad. It's sad because, I mean, she's a lovely, bright woman. She just didn't have the knowledge she needed to make a good decision.
Where do you see the future of health going?
Well, unfortunately, I liken it to an alcoholic, that I think we need to get worse before we get better. And certainly most of the stats, I mean, we get better in some areas, but I think overall it's going down. We have a very flawed system. It's fatally flawed, and it's getting worse by the minute, by the day, certainly. And largely because it's been captured by the corporations and federal regulatory agencies, which are controlled by the corporations. As a result, they dictate many of the policies and they direct many of the therapies, and this is a whole conflicted system. The peer-reviewed journal articles the studies are published by people who are essentially captured by the system, so it's really difficult to get the information up. But the end result is that we have a very expensive system that doesn't produce hardly any very limited beneficial results, and people are getting sick and sicker by the minute. So the diseases, epidemics, they're becoming pandemic, many of the diseases, like diabetes and Alzheimer's and obesities. So it's getting worse. And I believe it's going to continue to get worse. And at some point, potentially, hopefully short of an economic collapse, which many people predict will happen, but may never happen. Who knows? We can't predict the future. But essentially, we're going to be forced, because right now we have an unlimited printed press. We can fund this thing indefinitely if the world allows us to print money, which is what they've been doing for a long time. But at some point, that's going to stop. Who knows when? But when it stops, we're going to have to pay the piper. And at that point, we can't afford these crazy strategies. $100,000 for a cancer drug when the solution to cancer might be just a few dollars. I mean, that addresses the fundamental cause, not treats the symptoms. So, when the world starts searching and turning and looking for strategies that work, and we know what they are. I mean, these are not mysterious, hidden, dark. I mean, people know about them, but the vast majority of people are not, because they're dissuaded, they're given misinformation and deceptive information to direct them away from that. I mean, even just like this last week, they have the American Heart Association just comes out and just bashes coconut oil and saturated fat as being unhealthy when we know it's not. I mean, and it's just ridiculous. Funded studies that they do that are funded by conventional corporations just to try to get the last ditch and make extra money from selling the pernicious products they have that are decimating people's health. So it's I think it's going to get worse, and eventually, when people are dying in the streets and there's no other alternative, and we have the answer, and then they see it works, then they'll accept it and they'll adopt it.
Do you think like big data and technology is going to help shed a light, or do you think it's still going to get just hidden? It doesn't matter because big data.
Well, you're asking like the wrong person, because I'm totally biased. I'm a technophile. I'm a technophobe. I love technology, and I think the potential is incredible, especially artificial intelligence and general artificial intelligence, which is predicted to happen in the next 20, 30 years, probably 20 years more than likely. But the problem is you have to feed it data, deep. And if you give it the wrong data, if it's looking, they've got IBM Watson trying to treat cancer, but the only data they're giving it are the conventional oncology treatment. They're not giving it the other strategies that we know that works. But if the technology isn't good or bad, it's just neutral, just like a gun isn't good or bad. Depends on how you use it. So yeah, I'm embrace it, and at some point we just have to feed it the information that really is the truth. And when IBM Watson beat the two world-leading contestants in Jeopardy, it did it by scanning all this information from Wikipedia. But now, technology, that was like 5 years ago. Now they can read National Library of Medicine and digest it all and figure it out. So in ways that we don't know how. They just beat the world masters in Go. AlphaGo did, the Deep Mind project from Google, which we didn't think they'd do it for 20 or 30 years, but they did, and there's no way you could figure this out by traditional models. It was sort of a narrow artificial intelligence. They were able to do that. But nevertheless, it shows the beyond profound potential of this strategy. And I just shudder to think the implications of integrating that technology with the right information. It's just extraordinary. It basically solved the health problem of the world forever. Because you've got the knowledge, just a matter of figuring it out, and the deep learning strategies can do it.
Yeah, that's something that we want to try and do. Is we're collecting every bit of data we can of like every scan, and we're also collecting everyone's results, so we can sort of have the undeniable.
Yeah, and there's you could even partner with IBM. I think they have people using their Watson technology, but even Google, which probably will beat IBM, I think, has this TensorFlow technology. They can access their cloud and the supercomputers they have and use some of these strategies so that you can, if you know how to program and code in, you can figure these things out. But it's going to be, I think it's a bit challenging now, but it'll be pretty simple in the not too distant future.
Yeah, perfect.
So keep on collecting that data.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much. And we'll go and have some lunch.
All right, sounds good.